What's good, sports world? Welcome to Believe in Bills podcast. I'm your host, Mookie Hawkins. I have Justice the General in my okay, that's over my upper right. And hey man, we've been really excited about my guest here today. He's been definitely doing this thing on the draft scene. I kind of missed him out at the combine because I know it's a big thing, especially for him and what he does in this company. Joe Marino, you know what I mean? Draft network up in the house, man. Um, and man, we have one hell of a draft this year. It was a lot of uncertainty. You never you didn't even know who was going to be the number one overall pick till the card came in. You know what I mean? So just tell us a little bit about your thoughts on this year's draft.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. And let me turn on my camera. What's going on? I didn't realize I didn't have that on. Yeah, this was like you said, unpredictable draft. Not only from a Bills perspective because they're picking so late in the draft, and that's kind of the new norm, but also, like you said at the top, and how things were going to unfold and how many quarterbacks would come off the board and what that meant for pushing players down to the Bills. But entering the draft with the big need at cornerback, it was so obvious to everybody. It seemed like that was the position that they needed to address. And Brandon Beane came away with a guy that he had a first-round grade on in Kyer Elam out of Florida, and fits well to the scheme. Good ball skills, good coverage instincts, has the speed to carry routes vertically down the field, and you finally feel like the Bills have an exciting option opposite of Tre'Davious White. I'm not saying that Levi Wallace didn't do a nice job for 3.5 years as a starter and did what was asked of him, competed, and certainly a player with limited size, limited athleticism came in and was a really productive starter for a top-tier pass defense for a long time. But you just kind of felt like his lack of speed, his lack of size limited the defense. And so you have a more physically gifted player opposite of Tre'Davious White now, and I'm excited to see what this defense looks like with Kyer Elam in the mix. And so, I think it was really important for the Bills to come away with a really exciting option at corner, and they did exactly that with Kyer Elam in the first round.
Exactly. And now when you look at it, when you see Kansas City trade up for Trent McDuffie, who would have known if those two guys were on the board? Was Elam really the guy? You know what I mean? To me, I think that Elam was the guy. Single-handedly, when you go in and look at their embedded, it just pretty much showed you Embiid was that guy. But a lot of people were saying that maybe it was for McDuffie, and if McDuffie was there, would the Bills select McDuffie? But just looking at that embedded just let me know that Elam was their guy on and on. When you look at the board, and then when you look at this year's cornerback class, size, speed, length, obviously is something that the Bills coveted. Replacing Levi Wallace, you had those tier one guys in Stingley and Sauce Gardner, and then you go in those tier two types. But out of those tier two types, only guy that had the size, the length, the speed, the physicality was Kyer Elam. So that triggered Bean to move up a couple of spots to go ahead and get him. After the fact, because it was kind of like a run on corners in that first round. So I'm very excited about the pick as well, Joe, and I think he's going to bode well in that defense. Not sure if he's going to come out to be the starter the way Dane Jackson, played last season. Only if Tre'Davious can't go, week one, then you'll see possibly Elam and Dane Jackson out there. But yeah, I'm very excited to see what this defense is going to look like, especially when Tre'Davious White get healthy. He has two All-Pros backing him up behind him there. So any type of rookie mistake, you're in good hands with those two and Poyer and Hyde. And then on top of what the Bills done to revamp that defensive line, with Singletary, with Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips and Daquan Jones and obviously Von Miller, right? Greg Rousseau in the second year. Ed Oliver should be a beast this season. So yeah, Bills fans are really excited to really see what this defense looked like. And when you look at this roster right now, this roster is better than last year's roster, you know. So I can see why a lot of people are predicting the Bills to make it to the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? So, Justice, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I take a look at our secondary, from last year, obviously after the the Tre'Davious White injury. A lot of people were thinking like, oh, the Bills Super Bowl window just closed and they're not going to be as good. But I mean, for good reason. Tre'Davious White is obviously a phenomenal player. And my logic was kind of like, all right, so we go from being the number one defense to maybe the number 10 defense. I mean, we still have Josh Allen in a dynamic offense, so we can still get the job done. And push came to shove, and we ended up still being the number one defense and the best pass defense. And so I look at that and I say, all right, we have one of the best safety net, if not the best safety net in the NFL, in the Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, sitting behind your cornerbacks, and should they make any mistakes or anything like that. I look at how Dane Jackson held his own. I look at, Levi Wallace, who, Joe alluded to, maybe didn't have the athletic prowess that it would take to be a dynamic shutdown corner. But they still held their own, and they got the job done for the most part, especially without the presence of a dominant pass rush, and they still got the job done for the most part. So you couple that with now what you presume to be a dominant pass rush. You now have a guy in Kyer Elam who is a lot more dynamic than a Levi Wallace. Dane Jackson, who's a 7th round pick. Teron Johnson, who's a stud. He's a 4th round pick. And then you get a first round pick in Kyer Elam to be opposite the first round pick, Tre'Davious White. And we saw what our coaching staff did with him in his first round talent. They turned him into a superstar. You turn Teron Johnson into a star as a 4th, and Dane Jackson is now, approaching being a starter level caliber corner as a 7th round pick. So clearly the developmental process of, this coaching staff specifically to the secondary is very, prominent. So I look at the traits that Kyer Elam possesses and I say, with this coaching staff, this environment, this defense, now you add a pass rush. I think Tremaine Edmonds is going to have a breakout year due to, the now stoutness of the defensive line. I just see it getting better at every level. And to obviously have now 2 first-round corners come in, and, when Tre'Davious is healthy, you're going to have 2 dynamic talents to be able to shut down both sides of the field theoretically. And then, even having a Dane Jackson, on the back burner is no slouch at all. And I think that they're really comfortable, with Teron Johnson and his role in the defense. So I think that it really kind of shifts the entire dynamic of this defense. Already having the number 1 statistical defense and now just improving at every area, like, it's going to be a crazy season.
No doubt, no doubt. Let's just backtrack a little bit and just bring the spotlight on my guy Joe, man. So just tell us a little bit about how you started the Draft Network, Joe.
Well, I mean, it's the vision of several people, myself and Kyle Krabs, being able to come together and work with some other guys and get the thing launched, and then just having some great opportunities along the way to build it and expand it. And obviously Paige DeMacos coming in as our CEO. She's been a wonderful leader for us to build the business and build the staff and make really good decisions for us. And Jamie Eisner from our managing editor coming in and really stabilizing our content plan, and what Kyle does leading our scouting efforts. And it's been really cool to see it all come together since we launched in 2018. And really, really proud of what we've been able to build, and really excited for where we're going in the future. So we strive to do things a little bit different and cover the draft differently, and not be satisfied with status quo. And I think we've done a good job of that to this point, and excited for the future.
Absolutely, man. Hey, you're doing some great things. A lot of people, hundreds and thousands of people are definitely tuning into, what the Draft Network says and does. I mean, obviously that was just definitely shown at the combine this year. I mean, you guys were, real good out there. I meant to come down and sit and just crash your booth, but it was just, so full. I couldn't even crash it. You know what I mean? It was just a line of people just waiting to be interviewed by you guys. But, getting back into the draft here with these Bills. What are your thoughts on James Cook?
Yeah, I like the addition of James Cook. I think he'll provide what's been missing from this running back situation in Buffalo, where you have a real speed threat to the perimeter, a guy that can really run those wide zone runs and help the Bills be able to attack defenses in different ways than they have in the past with their running backs, but also the receiving threat. That's where you really get excited about with James Cook, a guy with really good hands. He runs routes like a receiver. You can put him in the slot, and you can just create a whole lot of mismatch issues for defenses by putting him on the field with the other versatile players the Bills have at tight end and wide receiver. And I get excited about what James Cook can take off of Josh Allen. I think we all recognize we love how dynamic Josh Allen is, but we're a little uneasy about some of the hits that he takes. And having a really consistent check down option, a player that, you know, if they want to run two high safeties and drop 8 in coverage and flood the coverage lanes, you've got a really good player out of the backfield to get the ball to very quick and challenge them to come up and make tackles. And James Cook last year in the SEC averaged over 10 yards after catch per completion. And so you just love that being in the mix now for Josh Allen, a player that can help keep him in rhythm with even more consistency and provide a really reliable check down option. I'm excited for him in the screen game. I think we can all agree that the screen game hasn't been something the Bills have been overly effective at in recent years. And so you look at the low-hanging fruit and how an elite offense can get better. It's having a player like James Cook in the mix, and they got their guy in the second round. We're able to trade back a couple of times and gain some additional capital later in the draft and still get a player that's going to mean a lot to this offense. And so he's not going to be the between the tackles banger or anything like that, right? He's got a narrow frame, really thin from the waist down, but this guy brings speed. He brings perimeter running ability and obviously the receiving prowess that this backfield's been missing.
No doubt. If we can get a comparison of who do you think that Cook compares to, who you think he'd compare to in the NFL?
Man, that's a really good question. I actually have something written down. I'm going to check my notes because a couple of weeks ago on Locked On Bills, I did a running back primer, and part of that was I gave a comp for everybody. And I pulled up my notes here. I have James Cook and I have my notes, and my comp I have written down. He's so unique. And then I had two names, Gio Bernard and Felix Jones. And obviously I don't love either of those comparisons, but just a speedy receiving threat. He's really different. I've not seen a lot of players that are like him, to be completely honest with you. Normally, if you're a 5'11 back, you're probably 210, 215. You know, Cook is under 200, like he's weighing in at 199, and I think he has to work to get that big. And you know, he's just a unique player. So I'm not going to force a comp. Just know he's fast, can run the ball outside, and really good at catching it.
So maybe before you shoot Justice there, maybe I can give you a comp. And we know that our guy Eric Chiano, Bill's strength conditioning coach, is one of the best in the NFL. So putting that weight on him shouldn't be a problem. Actually, I was talking to Eric during the draft, and I was asking him about, you know, that weight thing, and he was just saying, hey, you know, we'll get the necessary weight on those guys. We just got to get in our building and see, you know, how much those guys can hold. But the comparison that it seems like a little bit to me where he strikes off is, how about Alvin Kamara? What do you think about that?
I think that James Cook is a much more explosive football player than Alvin Kamara. And that's no shot at Kamara. I mean, but Kamara's a mid 4.5 guy, and James is a low 4.4 guy. They're different in that regard. Alvin's a lot more dense, 5'10", 215 pounds. Really, really good contact balance, where I think contact balance in different ways. James Cook is very balanced with how he strings together moves, and he does a very good job of setting up the tackler to make it difficult for them to square up on him. And I think he has very advantageous opportunities to shake and wiggle and get out of tackles. Kamara is a guy that's going to absorb power and break tackles in different ways. So they just have really different contact balance. I appreciate the receiving prowess that both players bring to the table, but I think they win in different ways, and they have different body types and different athletic profiles. And so I can see some stylistic similarities, but you know, I'll be honest with you, I don't know if that's fully where I go with the comp for me and how I interpret James Cook.
I like that breakdown on that. I like that. That's why we got the Draft Network on deck here this morning, so they can just like give it to us, you know what I mean, straight with no chaser, baby. You know, I like that. I like that a lot. Just to shoot.
Yeah, absolutely. So, looking at this draft class, and when you compare, draft stock value, talent, what they can contribute to the Buffalo Bills, and all of that relative to where they were picked, who do you think is the most valuable pick that the Buffalo Bills got this past weekend?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was pretty satisfied with the value across the board, at least in terms of how I valued the players and where Brandon Beane picked them, right? We're usually pretty in lockstep there, but the plus value, the guy that I thought that was worthy of a pick a couple of rounds earlier was Khalil Shakir, the wide receiver out of Boise State. The Bills got him in the 5th round. If he was the Bills pick in the 3rd round, I wouldn't have blinked an eye. I would have thought it was a great pick in the 3rd round. It's an amazing pick in the 5th round, where this guy comes in and, you know, you hear Brandon Beane, Josh Allen, Sean McDermott. They talk about wide receivers, and what do they say? We're looking for guys that can get open and catch a football. Well, that's Khalil Shakir. Great route runner, strong, confident hands. You know, he's going to win in those ways, and you love that. He just kind of fits right in, and I love that he's got punt return ability, 48 punt returns in college when you consider both returns and fair catches. He had 2 muffs his very first season at Boise State, none after, and we know that punt returner is an important role for the Bills to get figured out. I think he's probably the leader in the clubhouse to handle those duties. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't be surprising to me that after this season, if you know, Jamison Crowder winds up being a 1-year player for Buffalo, that Shakir's the featured slot receiver. And so if you get your starting punt returner and starting slot receiver in year 2 with a 5th round pick, I mean, that's incredible value. He's wired the right way. He's got toughness, military family he came up through, known for his football character, leadership over at Boise State. I mean, he's a process guy through and through, an absolutely wonderful fit for this Bills offense, and, you know, hopefully special teams as well.
Is there a player that you had maybe you didn't necessarily? I know you said you liked the value across the board, and I agree. Yeah. Was there one that you liked maybe less than everyone else?
Yeah, I could point to a few picks, but I mean, I look at Luke Tenuta and Balin Spector, the Bills' last 2 picks. I mean, how much can you really nitpick? I just don't see a path for either of those guys to make the roster. And I think that's probably okay. Last year, the Bills didn't have two draft picks make the roster. It's a good team. It's hard to make this roster. But those are 2 players that, look, I don't think the value was bad, but are we ever going to see them dress on a Sunday? I don't know if that'll be the case. I guess if we're going to go with more of the, you know, the players that are picked earlier, I would go with Tyrell Bernard, the Bills' 3rd round pick, 89th overall, linebacker out of Baylor. I see a path for him. I do. I think he's an athletic player that is good in coverage, that thrives as a gap shooter, playing downhill. You don't want him stacking and shedding blocks. You don't want him playing as your Mike linebacker. He doesn't have the length to really thrive in those areas, and he's a little small. But if you told me that the Bills liked Tyrell Bernard as a option to put on the field with Edmonds and Milano, and they want to go 3 linebackers and maintain some of their nickel principles that they like, right? They're a base 4-2-5 defense. Well, if you wanted to sub, which I know this is contrary to the way we've talked about football for 50 years prior to this, but if you wanted to go sub 4-3, normally we talk about base 4-3, sub would be 4-3 in this Bills defense, and you put Tyrell Bernard on the field as your 3rd linebacker but can maintain your nickel principles, okay, well, that's exciting to me because you diversify some of your looks on defense, where I think the Bills, from a personnel perspective, it was the same 11 players. I mean, obviously the defensive line would rotate, but the back 7 players are always the same. Mm-hmm. And I think you now give yourself a chance to, again, maintain the core principles of your defense, but actually have a linebacker on the field, which may make you tougher against the run, which is going to be important when you consider the division. You have the Patriots, Jets, Dolphins, all teams that want to run the football. That's going to be their bread and butter. The entire AFC North wants to run the football. And you want to, the Colts and Titans want to run the football, and you want to bring teams to Western New York to play football in January, you better be able to stop the run. And so I do think that Tyrell Bernard helps diversify the Bills' defense, even if he wasn't my favorite direction to go at pick 89.
So speaking of that direction, and we'll get into Khalil still in just a minute, but that direction, what do you think that the Bills should have? What direction you think the Bills should have gone, in the 3rd round there? Because a lot of people were saying that Bernard would have been there in the 5th round. And then, as you said with Khalil, you wouldn't have blinked if if the Bills chose Khalil in the 3rd. So what do you think that what was there for the Bills at pick 89 other than Bernard?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I could sit here and tell you that I think Khalil Shakir would have been a great 3rd round pick, but it's the same thing. Well, they could have had him in the 5th round, and we know the answer to that. They really could have. They picked him in the 5th round. Same thing with Tyrell Bernard. I can sit here and tell you that he would have been available in the 5th round, but who knows, right? We don't know the answer to that. So I think Shakir would have been a great 3rd round pick. I love Dylan Parham. He's an interior offensive lineman from Memphis. I think he would have been a really outstanding pick in the 3rd round. But clearly the Bills looked at their linebacker depth and wanted to do something about it. I mean, the players that they visited with pre-draft, and Troy Anderson, and the Wyoming linebacker Chad Muma, they definitely wanted to improve this linebacker depth. They took 2 of them, so this was definitely a priority for this football team. And so, I'm not going to argue with the value that the team placed on this position. I saw it a little bit differently. But I see the path for Bernard, and maybe Parham would have been my guy at 89. But I think that there's a good vision in place here with the players we did get.
Yeah.
With that pick though, Bills linebackers coach Bob Babbage, he had to be the one to pound the table at that point. Like, hey, let's go get my guy. I'm not sure he's going to be there. At 5th, because the Bills didn't have a 4th. So, that's where, pounding that table starts to coming into play. And them not selecting a guard, and I figured that they would probably go that route as well, especially when they got the cornerback and the running back off the board. You look at what's next. Interior lineman and linebacker, right? So I think that, I guess they gave Coach Cromer a lot already in free agency as far as linemen, but they didn't still address the interior, which makes me believe that Cody Ford is safe for now. You know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on Cody Ford in his contract year?
Yeah, I think the team is optimistic about Cody Ford this year. We've kind of heard Brandon Beane talk about that. A clean slate for him, new offensive line coach, his first offseason where it wasn't either his rookie offseason or injured, right? He's rehabbing from injury. So Cody Ford's a gifted football player. There's no question. There's a reason he was a top 40 pick. A lot of people mocked him as a 1st round player right up until the 2019 draft or whatever year he came out. So he's a gifted player. He's had circumstances that have made it difficult for him to play to his potential. And we know that there's been some personal things there as well that he opened up about over last year's offseason. And so, yeah, he's been an uneven player on the field. And I don't expect him to start. I think it's pretty clear that Saffold and Bates are your Bills starting guards. But I think Cody Ford can be a top 2 reserve for this team and a player that I expect to make the roster. I think maybe there's some fans out there that are over Cody Ford and don't want him to be part of the mix. I would get ready for him to be part of the mix this year, because I think the team's going to give him another chance here to prove what he can do and start over here with their Aaron Cromer in a new offense and in a situation where he's not injured for the first time in his career.
Yeah, and maybe not switching positions and every
good
time.
point.
Yeah. So to your point, I was doing like a live draft coverage, and everybody in the 2nd round was like, "Oh, Dylan Parham." So yeah, absolutely, I think that's fair. So I kind of want to move back to the Tyrell Bernard pick for a little bit. So when I was looking at his tape, to me, it kind of felt like the 80-20 rule. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it's like when you have a partner, they give you 80% of what you want. And then you are missing the 20% and you go out and you see the 20% in somebody else and you feel like, oh, they're the perfect person, but it's not quite that because they're missing the 80% you were having before, right? So when I look at Bernard, I say a lot of the things that I feel like maybe Tremaine Edmonds isn't amazing at, I think he does everything well, right? I don't think there's anything he does that is like below average per se. But when I look at Bernard, I feel like his field awareness, his ball skills, his ability to shoot the gap, those things he does a little bit more consistently than Tremaine to me. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Do you think that that's a valid thing?
Well, I can understand if you watch the tape on Bernard and watch the tape on Edmonds, I can see why you would come away with that. But I think you have to go a little deeper and understand that Tremaine Edmonds is asked to be a read and react football player, where he's got a lot on his plate. He's got to defend multiple gaps against the run, and he's got a lot of range he's responsible for in coverage. That's a lot different than Tyrell Bernard, who was literally asked to shoot gaps. He didn't have to be a read and react player. He's like, no, you're going to shoot the A gap on this play. And then when you're talking about Big 12 football that is all spacing and wide open, and you're just telling a guy to shoot a single gap and try to make a play in the backfield, it's a really different assignment than what Tremaine Edmonds has. If you just ask Tremaine Edmonds, hey, shoot the A gap, he's going to make crazy plays just like Tyrell Bernard, but he doesn't. That's not the case. He has to be a read and react player. And so I think we have to keep that in mind when we talk about what Bernard brings. And you say that this guy, he knifes through holes and he's slippery through gaps. Yep, that's because he's asked to do that. You know what I mean? And ask him to play 7 yards of depth, read the guards, take on a block, stack and shed, and finish, right? Like, that's a different deal. And so that's where I would really be cautious when we consider the two styles, because they were really asked to do different things. And that's why for what my initial reaction, I had to react to this pick live on a broadcast, and you don't have time to really think that much, right? Like you it's kind of like you get in an argument with somebody and you think about all the cool stuff you should have said afterwards when you walk away. That was kind of how I felt when I initially broke down the Tyrell Bernard pick on our live stream with the Draft Network, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, this is Tremaine Edmonds' last year that he signed, and maybe they don't have enough money to bring him back and he's going to walk in free agency. I still think the Bills are going to bring back Tremaine Edmonds, but if they didn't, I was thinking that they would draft his replacement this year. And so when I see Tyrell Bernard as the pick in the 3rd round, I'm like, oh man, this isn't a player that I think can come in and do the things that the Bills asked Tremaine Edmonds to do. But then once I got past that, and I said, okay, maybe he's not going to be asked to be Tremaine Edmonds' replacement. Maybe he's legitimately going to be asked to be the next piece of this defense. And I go back to Carolina, and we always should go back to Carolina, because we've seen Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott want to replicate a lot of the ingredients that made them successful in Carolina. That's what these people do. What got you the job that you have, and what can you bring from your previous stop that got you there? And so, you think about Luke Kuechly, you think about Thomas Davis as linebackers for that Panthers defense, an amazing pair of linebackers. Well, they had both of those guys signed under contract, and they still drafted Shaq Thompson in the 1st round. Mm-hmm. And to me, Tyrell Bernard isn't coming in here to be a replacement for Tremaine Edmonds. He's not coming in here to be a replacement for Matt Milano. Maybe depth behind those players, but he's brought in to be the Shaq Thompson player for this defense, which is like the OG Buffalo nickel, where it goes back to the stuff I talked about earlier, where, hey, you could go 3 linebackers and maintain your nickel principles that you like for your scheme. And that's where I think he fits into this defense. You're not drafting Tyrell Bernard to replace Tremaine Edmonds. I think it's depth behind Milano, who's had some injury issues, right? We're all aware of that. And as that 3rd linebacker, because you do want to run more 4-3 sets. That's where I think he comes into play.
No doubt. Now, speaking of Tremaine Edmonds, do you feel that he's a scheme fit just based upon his attributes coming out of Virginia Tech? 6'6", 255, runs a 4.5. You're asking a guy with those type of traits to just read and react and is not playing aggressive. Me, I have a problem with that. I get their scheme, but to have a guy like that, and I just feel that's in some phases they don't use him correctly. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I hear what you're saying, but I also listen to other quarterbacks and other coaches every time they're playing against the Bills, and they talk about how troubling it is to deal with Tremaine Edmonds in the middle of the field. Like, if you're trying to slot throws in the middle of the field against the Bills, good luck. Good luck, because you got 34.5-inch arms, 253 pounds, 6'4.5", sitting right there. And we've seen the Bills get really creative with Tremaine and bring him up into the A gaps right at the snap and then drop him real quickly back, and how quickly he can cover distance and like take away some throwing lanes that the quarterback thought was on the menu pre-snap and they're quickly off the menu, and all of a sudden you thought you had free access on a slant route, but now Tremaine Edmunds is hauling ass backwards and taking away that throw, and now you have to move your eyes to the next read. Good luck, because now you got Poyer and Hyde that are leveraged and taking away more throws. And so it's all part of the puzzle. Like you can't have it both ways. You can't ask Tremaine Edmunds to be a gap shooter, but then also maintain what makes the Bills defense so difficult to complete passes on, which is, I mean, look at the passer rating against this Bills defense. It speaks for itself. Nobody does well. No quarterback does well consistently against this defense. And so I hear what you're saying, but I mean, I don't think you can have it both ways. And so you have to pick. And, you know, sometimes they will ask Tremaine to blitz, but I think on passing downs, his best ability is what he takes away in terms of working into throwing windows and forcing quarterbacks to move their eyes. And you know, the Bills leverage the field. They space it a very specific way. They're trying to make quarterbacks have to make accurate throws to difficult portions of the field outside the numbers. And so when you have Tremaine clogging up the stuff in the middle, Poyer and Hyde just phenomenal at what they do at taking away throws, and you have corners that are leveraged that are playing inside out, and your only spot to complete a pass is a 5-yard window from the sideline in. You don't have a lot of places to go with the ball. And so I don't know, it's an either or thing. I don't think you can have both. So you have to choose.
Yeah, you definitely have to choose. And that's just going into my next question about that. How would this defensive front make Tremaine Edmunds' game a little bit more better than what it has been?
Yeah, I think the big thing about how the front can help Tremaine is by being better against the run, where he deals with a lot of contact that he shouldn't have to deal with. And that's because, you know, one techs are getting driven off the ball and pushed into his lap, and now he's got more junk to sort through on his way to the football. And so I think you have a player now in Daquan Jones who's the best one tech the Bills have had since Tremaine Edmunds has been drafted. And, you know, you go back the whole history. I mean, you had Jordan Phillips running as a one technique. That's not his game. He's a 3. You've had Vernon Butler getting run at one technique, and he can't defend the run. You know, you had some positivity with Harrison Phillips, but he had his own injury issues when he was in town. Starlo Talele, inconsistent as they come. And so I think you have a player now that can stabilize that one tech and allow Tremaine to be a little bit more free to read, react, process, and get to his landmarks. And so the biggest thing that the Bills can do to help Tremaine Edmunds is by solidifying that defensive line, which I think they've done this offseason. And then, you know, Tremaine, he's a young player. I mean, was his birthday yesterday? Just turned 25 years old?
Yeah, a couple days ago. Just turned 24.
24. 24 years old. This guy's played 4 years in the league. You know, 2 Pro Bowls, 3-time team captain. Like, that's not normal. I know that he's not been the most consistent football player for the Bills. Like, I get that. But what this guy's accomplished at such a young age, like, he hasn't plateaued. He hasn't reached his ceiling. And so
there's guys being drafted now that are his age.
Right.
So
that's friggin' insane. That's absolutely insane. So this guy, I mean, he's one of those players that, like, maybe you wish he was more consistent, but I'd be scared like hell letting this guy get out of your building and go be a superstar for some other team.
Yeah, him on the Steelers roster is the scariest thing in the world to me. Like, Tremaine Edmunds with the Steelers is super scary.
Right, with Tuitt and Hayward and all those guys in front of him. Yeah.
That's petrifying. All right. Yeah. So I had a question, right? So when I look at Khalil Shakir, I'm like, that value was so incredible that it's hard to really even, you know, see anybody else as probably the best value pick. But there was a guy who kind of went under the radar to me, and I feel like because there were so many good players taken, James Cook, Kyer Elam, Matt Araiza, that he kind of went under the radar. Christian Benford, right? He's 6'1", 196 pounds, 31-inch arms. He's not afraid of contact. He is a ball hawk. He seems to always be around the ball, right? I look at him, and first I think that's an extremely good value for that pick, right? And then I also could see him being a little dynamic. Maybe, you know, if he seems like he has the frame to be able to put on a little more weight, could potentially maybe play like a safety hybrid role potentially. What do you think about Christian Benford as a player and as a pick overall?
Yeah, this is the pick that we're probably not talking enough about, and I'm thankful that you asked about him, because it's easy to kind of overlook this, FCS player from Villanova, double dip at corner. They drafted Rashard Wildgoose last year out of Wisconsin, stashed on the practice squad, got plucked. You kind of forgot about him already. I think Benford's got a real chance here. And first of all, a Villanova kid, that's kind of the area that Sean McDermott's from, right? Got roots in the Philadelphia area. And so you like that. You're sure that you kind of get the hunch that McDermott had a little bit of a hand in that pick. But then you think about the ball skills, like you mentioned. What do you have? 7 interceptions this past year, 5 in 2018, nearly 50 pass breakups, a guy that knows how to get his hands on the football. Unbelievable run defender and tackler, right? He's a guy that doesn't miss tackles. Like you said, he's always around the football. He's physical and aggressive. That's going to translate really well to special teams. And so I start thinking about, okay, well, Tywan Jones they love as a jammer and a gunner for the punt team, and his leadership traits that he brings to the table, and Tywan's probably back for one last hurrah. Maybe this is your successor there. This is a guy that's going to pair with Saran Neal to be your gunner and your jammer on your punt team. But then also, like you said, he's got some appeal to play some safety. And so maybe there's not a very clear path for him helping this team as an outside corner, given Trey White, Kyer Elam, Dane Jackson all ahead of him on the depth chart. I don't think he's going to jump any of those players. But you think about maybe a developmental guy at safety where both Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, we know they're aging, but they're also guys that started their careers as cornerbacks. And I think the Bills inherently love that about safeties, guys that have a corner background. I think that helps you be more complete safety and understand the whole breadth of coverage schemes. And so you put this guy back there as a, like I said, gunner, jammer, depth at outside corner, but you start thinking about him as a potential safety. And there's just so many different ways that this guy is a 6th-round pick can come in and find different paths to making an impact for this football team. So, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he's the next Jordan Poyer or the next Micah Hyde or he's the next Tywan Jones on special teams. But I am here to tell you that there's a reasonable belief that he can do those things, and he does have the foundation of skill necessary to become a meaningful player in a couple of different ways for the Bills.
Absolutely, man. I love the FCS stud. The Bills has definitely did their homework on this guy. 14 career interceptions. So once again, he has a knack of getting on the football. And let's talk about the length there. 6'1", 205, physical guy. It seems like that was the point of emphasis, when you're dealing with those cornerbacks, rangy with the physicality to match. Something that, Sean McDermott has been lacking in, that cornerback group. But, moving on to obviously the obvious is the punter, right? The punt guy. Why do you feel that, he slipped? Because there was a couple punters that went ahead of him, in this year's draft. And what do you think, as far as the pick, do he has a shot on meeting Hack out for the spot?
Yeah, I think all right, how do I say this the right way? Matt Araiza is a very exciting punter prospect. He is. I'm excited for him to be on this Bills roster. But that doesn't mean he came without questions. He's got questions. 3 big questions. Number one is that he's only been a 1-year punter. So this isn't a guy with a ton of time on task as a punter. He was a kicker. And so obviously in one season as a punter, he was unbelievable. He set the record in college football history for net yards per punt. Just unbelievable, almost 52 yards a punt. It's rare stuff. He's a very gifted player, but he's also a player that only has 1 year of experience. He's never been a holder in a game, right? And that's a primary function of one of the primary functions of a punter is to hold. And in fact, the Bills punters hold more than they punt. You know what I mean? It's an important thing that they do. I think 110 holds last year compared to 46 punts. It's double. It's a big deal being able to be that holder. And, I'm sure that Matt Araiza can develop as a holder, but normally a punter comes into the NFL with years of game experience holding. And you're not trying to make Tyler Bass worse by not having a reliable holder. We saw, with Corey Bojorquez, the inconsistency with his holds and how that hurt Matt Hawk early on in his career, or how that hurt Tyler Bass, early on in his career. You saw Corey Bojorquez go to Green Bay this past year, and Mason Crosby was missing field goals left and right because Corey Bojorquez couldn't hold. Go to the Miami Dolphins. Jason Sanders with Matt Hawk in 2020. All-pro kicker, excuse me. One of the best kickers in the league. The next year, Matt Hawk leaves. He doesn't have Matt Hawk as his holder. And the Miami Dolphins had the lowest made field goal percentage of any team in the NFL. That's because Jason Sanders forgot how to kick field goals. The holder component, the entire function, the mechanics of kicking a field goal is relying on that holder doing their job. And so I'm not sitting here and trying to create a doomsday scenario with Matt Araiza and saying he can't hold, but he has to prove that. So inexperience as a punter, right, is inexperience as a holder, and a guy that has an amazingly strong leg but not a lot of control. When his pooch punt opportunities, 30% of the time resulted in a touchback. That's way too high. That needs to be cut down by 75%. So he's raw. He's a really raw player as a punter and what you're going to ask out of that punter. All the talent in the world, but there's a reason he was the third punter drafted, and those reasons are why. Jordan Stout was the best punter in this class. Then Jake Camargo from Georgia. The NFL got it right. Now, could Araiza be the best of the group? Absolutely. But he's got questions to answer.
No doubt. No doubt. And before I let you go, how does this draft class, where do you see this draft class helping this Buffalo Bills team?
Well, I think if you just kind of run through it, I mean, give me 1 second here. I got to pull up the picks here because I like this question and I want to make sure I answer it well. Hold on. Typed in the wrong year, but 2002 instead of 2022. So I think when you look at this class, I think you got a starting corner in Kaiir Elam, and I know Mookie, you had mentioned that maybe that's not the case. Every first round pick under Sean McDermott, they start. You go back to Trey White, day one starter. Tremaine Edmonds, day one starter. Josh Allen was a starter at halftime of week 1 against Baltimore, his rookie season. Ed Oliver, day one starter. Greg Rousseau, day one starter. I have no reason to believe that Kaiir Elam's not going to fall right in line with that. I think you have an X factor on offense in James Cook with what he gives you in terms of speed and receiving ability. You have a player in Tyrell Bernard that can help diversify your defense, right? We talked at length about that. Mm-hmm. You have a player in Khalil Shakir that I think is your punt returner and your slot receiver, your primary slot receiver in 2023. And you have your starting punter and Matt Araiza, a guy that can flip the field. We talked all about Christian Benford and what he can mean as a gunner and a jammer and as developmental player for the secondary. And I think that's what you came away with 2 practice squad stash players in Luke Tenuta and Balin Spector. To me, that's a lot of roles filled with draft picks. And I think should all of that come to fruition, we're going to look back in this draft and say, man, another really strong haul from Brandon Beane.
No doubt, man. So what would you give your draft grade?
So I did this for the Draft Network. I did my Bills grades. I gave it a B+. And I obviously I've detailed what I think of this class and what I think they can do. I'm a stingy grader. What kept me away from giving it an A is I don't really feel like they came away with plus value. You know what I mean? Like, for you to get an A for me, you better address your needs and you better get some players that you really shouldn't have. And I think the Bills did in Khalil Shakur. Like, that's one example, but I need more than one example, right? To be able to get like those just absolute steals that made no sense that they were there and that everyone's going to regret that the Bills got them. I think James Cook might be that player, but it's still a second round pick, right? Like, you'd expect there to be impact from a second round pick. So I didn't see enough steals for the Bills to get an A, but just a rock solid job across the board. And like I said, if everybody reaches their potential and did the things that I said that they could do, it's going to be, we're going to look back in this draft very favorably.
Let's say the Bills would have took Nakobe Dean in the second round and then maybe came back if Cook or Spiller was there in the third round, or maybe give up some of those later assets that, like you mentioned, they're probably not going to make the team, to go back up and maybe get a Cook or like I said, a Spiller if they were still there in the late second to third round. Would that change your opinion on the draft? Because that's another steal that they could have potentially had, or even a Dylan Parham for that matter.
Yeah, you give me Parham, in the third round, I might give it an A. You mentioned Dean. I mean, the problem with Dean is just like, what does he look like outside of the Georgia defense, where he's got 20 NFL starters next to him, and this guy's got significant injury concerns. I mean, he declines surgery on his shoulder, he might miss his entire rookie season. So and why didn't he test? Why didn't he run? Like he's a player that's undersized linebacker. I wanted him to validate his athleticism. And so I don't know. I have questions about Nakobe Dean. So I don't know that if he becomes the Bills' second-round pick, that changes for me. But par him in the third. You give me the same thing, par him in the third. Could live without Bernard if I have to. But, I think the Bills did a really, really good job. I mean, and I think that's they're not that type of team. They're not a team like the Giants that have 2 top 10 picks and all these additional draft. They're not going to be that team that they're at a different point in their life cycle as a franchise. And so this is kind of what I think we'll expect from Bills drafts at this point. They've got that strong nucleus, that strong foundation laid. Now it's just about every year taking the assets that you have at your disposal to try to just keep adding to it. And we've went through it. The Bills added to it in meaningful ways, but yeah, the Bills aren't ever going to be that team anymore that just has, 5 picks in the top 75 and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe this infusion of talent. That's not where they are in their life cycle right now.
That's right. Now, everybody, I just heard it live in the flesh from founder of the Draft Network, Joe Marino. Joe, I appreciate you, giving us your time this morning, man. And, hey, we're going to definitely, pick your brain a lot more as this season goes, because, hey, it's going to be exciting this season for Bills fans. And, we're going to need you every step of the way, giving us some of that great insight you just displayed just now. So appreciate you, man. And I wish you nothing but the best moving forward with you and your brand there.
I appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me on, and best of luck on the launch of the pod here.
Absolutely. Hey, Bills fan, make sure you like, share, subscribe, believe in Bills. If you believe, then come on now. You got to choose us, right? You know what I mean? So make sure you like, share, subscribe. It's on YouTube. It's on Apple. It's on Spotify. It's everywhere. All right. So make sure you're there. Okay. So we're going to be here every week spilling out these podcasts, and we're going to have great guests, as you just see my guy, Joe Marino from the Draft Network, week in and week out. So, I'd like to thank everybody for watching and tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Go Bills.